So you all did a very nice job on this map assignment. There's a couple things I wanted to point out about the interpretation. I am grateful here. I'm using Bethany Schultz, so to give her credit for it. One thing I wanted to point out, her uh, column headers here were really nicely done in that they captured all the information in a single row of words. So one thing I want to point out is we're measuring gender inequality, but we're doing it based on several specific variables. So when I ask you how is gender inequality defined, some of you put that, oh, it's how women are treated or in the relationship, and these are all perfectly fine explanations. That is not what is being shown here. Here we have a very specific set of variables that are being measured on that you may or may not feel are important for gender equality. For example, the women in the workforce is a tricky issue. So in um, tends to be high poverty countries, there aren't as many women in the paid workforce. I mean, they're certainly working, but they're not necessarily paid for their time. Whereas then you get into like slightly wealthier middle income countries, and there you have a fairly high rate of women in the workforce. And then if you get into the wealthier countries, you have more and more women choosing not to be part of the workforce so that they can raise children or pursue some other thing. But it's more their choice that they're not. So measuring a country by percentage of women in the workforce, um, that might not be the best variable. The nice thing about something like this is now you know how to create a map. We didn't quite look at how to create an index, but essentially all you have to do is get some variables you care about and then standardize them, which we'll talk about very soon in this course, and then combine them all, take the average of the z-score, it's called, average of those z-scores, and you could create your own index and then map it, whatever you felt was important for showing gender inequality. So when we talk about countries like China, for example, China turns out to have, is it lower than I mean, even more gender equality than the U.S. If it's not lower, it's at least very close. As so does Saudi Arabia. Some of these really surprised a lot of people in the class. And again, that's because of what we're measuring it on. There may be other areas where those countries don't do so well in terms of gender equality. And it could also be that our stereotypes are wrong. Certainly, I know that a lot of my stereotypes of China have been broken as I've worked more and more with people from China and heard stories of and visited there, like seeing how the culture. So some of it's stereotype breaking, and some of it is how we're defining. But perhaps the biggest point that I wanted to bring about here is that just because we see the majority of the world as green does not mean that most of the world has equal rights for men and women. That's not at all what this means. This is all on a scale. It could very well be that the entire world is doing horrible at something, and we can still rank it relative. Like these people are doing less horrible than these people are, perhaps, with these countries. That doesn't mean that the thing shaded green. So that's where we want to be careful with the shading. The shading can show us variation, so it can show which countries are ranked higher or lower on something, but that's just relative to each other. So notice everything here is positive. I don't know if the scale is somewhat set up so that if you had a country where females actually had more rights and power than men, that you would be getting a negative. I haven't looked enough at how they've created that index, but that's my sense is that the greener are more equal, but still there's inequality between males and females that favors the males, and that's in any country around the world, even these Scandinavian countries, which tend to be the best in terms of, at least in terms of these